the program that we have created is known as Phorcides. And where did all this begin? The Rolling Stones, one of my favorite quotes from the Stones, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you might find you can get what you need. And this is really what was true for Alcon. Alcon went to the FDA and said, we would like to do a study looking at TCAT, topographic guided ablations, for highly irregular eyes. They've been doing this treatment in Europe and the rest of the world since 2003. This is what they wanted to bring to the United States. And the FDA said, no, that might be what you want, but what you need is actually virgin eyes, eyes that have not been treated before, primary eyes. Show that it's safe first. And so this is the study that was done here in the United States. This was the Alcon Wavelight US TCAT study looking at LASIK for myopia and myopic astigmatism. And to everyone's surprise, the results were absolutely fantastic. At 1 year, 93% of patients were achieving 20/20 or better uncorrected vision. The levels for 2015 were also very surprisingly good, about 70% of patients achieving 2015 uncorrected, and an astounding 1 in 3 patients at the 2010 level. So really impressive results with this. And for the first time ever in a LASIK study, they were showing a statistically significant decrease in a lot of the aberrations that patients would complain about following LASIK. Things such as glare, halo at night, difficulty driving at night. So really, we were very excited about this. The Contoura FDA results were very impressive, and they showed that the technology had tremendous potential. However, once it was first rolled out in the United States, we were told by Alcon we should treat off the manifest refraction. And this made sense because this is the way we had always done LASIK here in the United States. But the results that we found were not as good as what the FDA study was showing. And here in this slide, we're looking at data, my data here in orange, Dr. Kanellopoulos' published data, Contoura treating off manifest refraction in yellow. And what you can see is that neither of us were achieving the same levels of 20/20 uncorrected as were seen in the FDA study. More surprising was the drop that was seen at the 2015 level. In the FDA study, almost 60% of patients achieved that level, whereas roughly about 26% or 22% of our patients were achieving this. So in reality, Contoura treating off of the manifest refraction, the results were good, but not great. And they did not quite achieve the FDA results. So why is this? If you go back and look at the FDA study very carefully, you see that the eyes were chosen with great precision before they were entered into the study. And so the eyes had to show that the manifest astigmatism and the measured astigmatism were very, very similar. If there was a lot of astigmatism present, greater than 2 diopters, these two had to agree within 5 degrees. And if there was less astigmatism, they still had to be in tight agreement, 10-degree difference. The power could only differ by about 0.75 diopters or less. So these were carefully selected patients in the FDA study. And this is why they did so well. In reality, in your average day-to-day clinic, only about 10 to 20% of patients are meeting these strict FDA criteria. So what we learned from this, Contoura topographic guided LASIK is simply different from other forms of LASIK. It worked well in the FDA trials because cases were selected that had minimal topographic changes. And when there's little or no topographic abnormalities, the manifest and the measured are almost always the same. Well, time progressed, and we started to try to look for ways to do this better. And Dr. Kanellopoulos published his study on TMR, known as topography modified refraction. He said, really, we've been doing this wrong the whole time. We should not be treating off manifest. We should be treating off the full measured astigmatism, both in magnitude and in axis. And that's what we all began to do, at least in my clinic. And my children asked me, Dad, why is your hair turning gray? My hair is turning gray because it's very stressful to treat off the measured when it differs significantly from what the patient's asking for in the clinic, what their manifest is. Look at the case on the top here. Here, the manifest is minus 0.5 in the clinic. We're measuring 1.79 diopters of astigmatism. That's a difference of over 1.25 diopters between the two. The case on the bottom, they may be similar in magnitude, but there's an angle difference of 70 degrees between what the patient asked for in the clinic at the manifest versus the measured. This was a very difficult step for me to take, but I did it. And as I did it, and I followed TMR, I did see my results improve. So in this slide here, once again, my results in orange, Dr. Kanellopoulos has published data on TMR in yellow, comparing to the FDA. At the 2020 level, we really are seeing results that are quite good and close to the FDA. But at the 2015 level, once again, we fall behind, and we're not achieving the results that were seen in the FDA trial. Why? Well, treating off TMR ignores the contribution that topography plays on the manifest refractions of astigmatism. It also makes a big assumption. TMR assumes that the anterior corneal astigmatism plays the only role, that there's no accounting for posterior corneal astigmatism or internal astigmatism. And I'll show you a case where this is really important. So here's a patient of mine that I treated with TMR. It resulted in absolutely perfect anterior cornea, but imperfect vision for the patient. So this is 3 months post-treatment TMR planned Contoura. You can see that TMR has done its job. It's eliminated all astigmatism, 0.0 diopters here on the pentacam. And yet in clinic, the patient is asking for a manifest of 1.75 diopters. And at first I saw this, I said, this must be a mistake. So we ran it through the autorefractor. It also detected 1.75 diopters of astigmatism. I still didn't believe it. So we ran them through a wavefront guided machine looking at the wavefront predicted refraction, and it too found the cylinder there. So even though this patient had a perfect anterior cornea, they had imperfect vision because there's astigmatism internally in some eyes that plays a large role. And we need to understand this and account for this if we want perfect results. Now, I had the opportunity to join some other refractive surgeons who are experienced with Contoura at the ESCRS meeting, which was in Portugal. And we got together and we were trying to come up with a consensus of how should we recommend surgeons should plan treatment. And after everyone got together, there really was some discouragement. And it really came out to the understanding that we should only recommend surgeons treat patients with Contoura who met the very tight FDA criteria. And I left that meeting a little discouraged because I thought there's so much more potential here. More than 10% of patients should benefit from Contoura. And I'm walking out of ESCRS and I see this poster. And everything is impossible until it's not. And we had said, this is impossible to do better than this. And I really thought we could do better. And so just by chance the next day, I'm in Portugal, I take a trip out to the coastline. And there's a place called Cabo da Roca. And Cabo da Roca for thousands of years was the end of the earth. It was the westernmost point of Europe. You could not go any further west. And it's a really impressive place. The mountains cascade down into the sea, and it's got beautiful topography. And I'm at Cabo da Roca, I'm looking around, and I say, how does this topography, how is this handled in the real world? And when I got back to the United States, I began looking into this, and it turns out there's software that was developed over a decade ago called geographic imaging software. And GIS software, in the real world, we often will use two-dimensional maps to represent very complex three-dimensional structures. GIS software looks at the two-dimensional maps, pulls out all sorts of technical data that can be used for all sorts of planning. And I said to myself, this is what we have with Contoura. Alcon gives us a two-dimensional map, seen on the left, of a very complex three-dimensional structure. And so we began applying GIS software to the Contoura maps. What I really felt was needed was a different approach. I wanted to stop guessing. This is refractive surgery. I wanted an analytical, mathematical approach. I wanted to be able to predict the effects of combining a topographic treatment with the true anterior corneal cylinder. I wanted to be able to predict when there were significant contributions from the posterior cornean lens. And finally, I wanted logical explanations. Why is the manifest and measured differ in each eye? So think about this. Patients in the clinic, you have them at the phoropter. You're providing lenses. What happens to the light after it leaves the phoropter? Well, it's hit by A, the anterior corneal astigmatism, and the light is bent by that astigmatism. It's hit by T, topographical features that also bend the light. As it leaves the back of the cornea, it's hit by P, the posterior corneal astigmatism. Then finally, it hits L, the lens, and if there's lenticular astigmatism, it too plays a role. It's all three of these components, A, T, P, L, that make up the patient's manifest refraction, what they're asking for in the clinic. We know the manifest refraction. We can measure the anterior corneal astigmatism. We can measure the posterior corneal astigmatism. My group has figured out the topographical component, the refractive component it adds. So we have 4 of the 5 variables. We can solve for the missing variable, internal or lenticular astigmatism. And once you have all 5 variables, now you can perfectly plan each eye's treatment. And so this is what we set out to do. If you look at these Contoura topographic maps, these areas in purple are raised curved surfaces on the larger cornea. And what is that? That's a lens. It's a curved surface with a refractive index of cornea on one side and refractive index of air on the other. We've known lens theory for over 100 years. So these are amenable to optical physics calculations. But if you look at the image that's on the right, it's a little bit of an irregular surface. And so we've got to go one step further. There's a branch of mathematics that's known as differential geometry. It allows us to look at more complex curves and surfaces. And this is employed to also help us understand the complex three-dimensional surfaces of the cornea. Now, as I built Phorcides, I got really tired of saying raised topographic irregularities. And you can see in the map here with purple, I got tired of saying funny purple areas. So this software comes out of geology, and I decided to borrow a geological term called talus. If you've got a hill or mountain, you have a large slope, and on top of that, if you have debris that forms a smaller slope, this small area of debris with the smaller slope is called talus. And really, that's exactly what we have here. We have small mounds on the cornea that are superimposed on the larger corneal curvature. So I call these talus. And sometimes these talus are very big. In this case, the area in light purple is 47 microns of tissue that's going to be ablated. It's a large amount. So the taluses, if they have an optical effect, should have a very large optical effect in this case, and they do. The patient in the clinic is asking for a manifest refraction of minus 1.25 at 90. Measured astigmatism is 1.5 at 170. To go from 1.25 at 90 to 1.5 at 170 requires a 2.75 diopter shift. And sure enough, it's the taluses and their optical effects that are causing this. And so Phorcides software is designed to understand all of these aspects and explain it to the surgeon. Because
going back a slide, can we go back a slide? So that maximum down there on the far left at it looks like 42.68 microns.
That's right.
That's almost identical to what 2.75 diopters times 16 microns per diopter would be. So are you saying there's a real strong correlation between these high orders and the amount of taluses? I guess, is that a plural for talus?
Yes.
Okay, that contribute then to this with the rule astigmatism being introduced?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay.
So the height and the shape are very important. Here, in this particular case, these mimic a plus cylinder wavefront optimized treatment almost identically. If you go into your laser tomorrow, all the users that are out there tonight, and you plug in a plus 2.75 cylinder treatment in wavefront optimized tomorrow, you'll see a tissue ablation pattern that looks almost identical to this.
Almost that exact microns.
And almost in that microns as well.
And it's interesting to see that the position of the talus too plays a role.
It does, because they're vectors. Think of each of those purple mounds having a vector. Now, these are pulling in the same direction in the same axis, but if there were 3 or 4 of them, they may be negating each other's effects. So what Phorcides will do is it will find the talus, it will identify the height. The shape is not always so perfect as these, so it has to take into account the shape, the radius from the center. It does a lot of more complex calculations, but at its heart, yes, this is where the idea came from. So as we've been discussing just now, the white bar represents the patient's negative anterior corneal cylinder, and it's got a vector. The other blue arrow that's 90 degrees away, the posterior cornea, has a negative cylinder, and it has a vector. Now, each talus, each raised area in purple here, has a magnitude and direction, and so it's amenable to creating a vector. And so what the program does is it uses vector addition to add all these features up together. In practice, this is really what it looks like. So the user has gone to their Alcon Contoura planning laptop. They've gotten to the planning treatment screen. They've zeroed out their sphere and zeroed out their cylinder. So we're looking at the purely topographical treatment map. This image is then brought into Phorcides. And immediately, Phorcides has identified the patient's ID number, their date of birth, their name. It's identified whether we're working with a left eye or right eye, so there can be no confusion in terms of which eye is being calculated. It's looked at their manifest refraction, the Contoura recommended measured astigmatism, and it's also pulled in another important piece of data that comes from the Scheimpflug topographer, a Pentacam or Galilei G4. So it's taking confirmatory information about the anterior cylinder and adding that in. and it's taking information about the posterior corneal negative cylinder and adding that in as well. And so once this information has been entered, we begin to process that information. We hate mistakes. I hate mistakes. And what really gets me the most is if it's a mistake that would be preventable. So having done LASIK for 20 years now, there have been times where there's been simple transcription errors, where a patient's refraction's been entered incorrectly or their Ks are entered in incorrectly. I didn't want that to happen with this software. I needed to improve the safety. So the manifest refraction here, the clinical, is pulled directly from the Alcon planning laptop. So there's no possibility for transcription error. The Vario measured, recommended, is also pulled directly from that laptop. No chance for transcription errors. The data from the Scheimpflug device, the Pentacam or G4, is pulled directly from those machines. Again, no chance for transcription errors. And then what we're building, and it's going to be available to VGH surgeons, is we're going to compare the autorefraction, a calculated, measured value, to what's written for manifest. So one more final safety check, that we have this patient's prescription correctly entered into the software. As you're planning Contoura treatments, and you can see the small image up there, the color image, when we zeroed out the sphere, zeroed out the cylinder, we're looking at the purely topographic treatment. So what that max and that center value represent is the maximum height of ablation at the toppest talus, the toppest peak of the talus. Not, because we haven't entered sphere, we haven't entered in cylinder, not your total ablation, just what is the highest talus. And then we want to compare that to the center. Now this is important for looking at astigmatism, but Phorcides also uses these numbers for another reason, and that is, as Phorcides begins to analyze the topography using the GIS software, here it's identified the 3 areas in purple, the taluses. But I want you to notice something else. Notice there's areas of red that are connecting the 3 purple, and these are in the mid-periphery. And if you connect all those dots, it forms somewhat of a circular ablation pattern in the mid-corneal region. And by removing more tissue in the mid-cornea than the center, you are mimicking a hyperopic treatment from wavefront optimized. So Phorcides will analyze the amount of tissue being ablated in that area and will adjust your sphere down so you will not end up correcting that incorrectly as you treat the topography. So not only is it giving you more accurate cylinder correction, it's also giving more accurate spherical corrections.
I just have to interject one thing. When this software brings in the data from the Pentacam, I'm going to urge the users to double check the numbers at first. Alcon has been very good about making sure their software is compatible with yours and that the digits are recognized correctly. Earlier in the game, and I had a beta test, it sometimes would mistake a 7 for a 1. So I'm just urging you. I think that by the time you get the software, that's going to be solved completely, but I would ask you to just double check your numbers before you move forward.
It's a great point, and it's important for all refractive surgery, always double checking our numbers.
One more question on this image right here, Dr. Lobanoff. It's my fidget spinner that I introduced about a year ago, right? They look like fidget spinners.
Yes.
The purple taluses, can you really say that that is trefoil, where the red bridges are more chromatic effects, or is that too big of a stretch to make that type of similarities?
So you look at this pattern of 3, and we're so used to thinking about wavefront guided that we say trefoil. Okay, this is not trefoil. We're looking at topography. We're looking at 3 elevations on the cornea. Now, do they create a bending of light that mimics trefoil or is trefoil? Yes. But this in and of itself, I mean, if we're really being specific, this is not trefoil.
Because it's elevation data.
It's elevation data. We're treating topographically. And so one thing that I've been trying to do in my own head is get away from using old terms that are left over from our wavefront guided days and thinking more topographical terms. One reason why I came up with that talus term.
Excellent.
But you are right. This will bend light in a way that mimics a trefoil pattern. Yes.
Okay.
So the final screen, as we've analyzed everything with the software, looks something like this. I want it to look very similar to what you see with your Alcon Contoura planning treatment screen. It has the clinical, it has the measured, and instead of where we normally have modified, where we type in our treatment, we've put it as recommended. It gives you the correct sphere. This sphere has been adjusted for topographical considerations. It has been run through a nomogram, so you do not have to run this number through a second nomogram. And we've also maintained spherical equivalency. As you see in this case, the patient in the clinic is asking for minus 1.25 diopters at the phoropter. We're treating less than that, minus 0.9. We need to take half that difference, change the sign, add it to the sphere to maintain spherical equivalency. It's not a difficult mathematical calculation, but it's one place where you could make an error. Phorcides does this for you automatically. But I wanted something, in addition to giving you the correct sphere, cylinder, and axis, I wanted a why. I wanted the answer. I wanted a quick visual representation that explained to me what was going on. So if we look here in this case, the patient's asking for more cylinder in the clinic than we're measuring on the cornea. Why? So the vectors down here, the vector in yellow is the patient's manifest astigmatism. You can also notice that next to that is the green vector, which represents the total corneal astigmatism, and a red vector, which is the amount of calculated internal astigmatism in this patient. Notice that if you take and combine the red arrow and the green arrow, they add up to that yellow arrow. We're getting a quick visual representation of why the numbers are the way that they are in this patient. Why is the patient asking for a different refraction in the clinic than we're measuring on the cornea? And that's where that vector diagram is there. It's just to help give you a quick visual representation of the why behind everything. We can then hit the save button up at the top, and it saves the treatment for you. So if you want to make software that's useful, that's exceptional for a LASIK practice, what are you really looking to do? It's got to be easy to use. So a lot of you know Carl Stonecipher. He's one of our beta test sites. You know, his comment was the ease of use of this technology was its best asset. The analysis is simple and accurate. And he's going to be presenting some data at ASCRS. And he just shared with me tonight the data. And what he is finding is that Phorcides is giving the best results in terms of visual acuity, quality, and night vision compared to Contoura treated off of TMR or Contoura treated off manifest refraction. So he's very bullish on this technology. Software's got to be fast. We're busy. We've got lots of patients to see and treat. We need this to be efficient for surgeons. It cannot slow them down. And if you think about this, this is not a nomogram. Phorcides is much more advanced than that. It's doing many more advanced calculations. But it's also much faster than a simple regular nomogram that you're used to using where you have to type in the data. Treatments can be calculated in under 10 seconds. And here I'll show you a patient being calculated in real time. We're analyzing the taluses. We're hitting calculate treatment. And we have our answer. And that literally took 7 seconds. So 7 seconds to calculate your treatments, and you're getting the correct treatment.
And by the way, that sheet right there is what we print out and put into the chart.
And what Phorcides does is it wants to make you efficient in the OR as well. So you're right, we store all these results in a single file. You can print them out. We do the same thing. We bring this into the LASIK suite with us so we can compare each treatment sheet to what's being entered into the laser in real time. Software's got to be universally understood, and it's got to be highly accurate. It needs to work every single time. It's got to be safe. And as we look at the same safety parameters that were used in the FDA trial for Contoura, among our 18 beta test sites, no patients had best corrected visual acuity worse than 20/40. No patients saw an increase in their cylinder over 2 diopters, and no patients had a loss of best corrected visual acuity of 2 lines or more. So it met all the safety parameters of the FDA studies. Sharing with you just a little bit of my early results. When I began looking at Contoura and Phorcides, I said, is this all worth it? Bringing this in, learning something new is always a challenge. I really love Wavefront Optimize. Wavefront Optimize gives me great results. It's easy to use. So it's got to be better. And I did a study where I looked at 34 patients, and I treated a Phorcides planned Contoura treatment in one eye. The contralateral eye was treated with Wavefront Optimization. This is 1 month post-op data. And 60% of the patients had better uncorrected vision in their Phorcides planned Contoura eye than they did in their Wavefront Optimized contralateral eye. We know Wavefront Optimized is very good, so it's not surprising. 30% of the eyes, 30% of the patients said Phorcides planned Contoura, Wavefront Optimized, equally good. Only 10% of the patients said their Wavefront Optimized eye was better vision, had better visual acuity uncorrected than the Phorcides planned Contoura eye. So this is what told me that this is worth all the effort, that as good as Wavefront Optimize is, we can get better results.
So yeah, I'm going to interject. Yesterday we had a patient who was 4 months out, who was complaining about the vision in one eye, not the other. And the technician walked in and said, the patient's complaining about their left eye. And we looked back on the chart, and the eye that she preferred was the Contoura Phorcides eye, and the eye she didn't prefer was the optimized eye. And it could be totally just coincidence, but it was enough that I talked with Dr. Polk that maybe we should not do one eye Contoura Phorcides because of that. Right. And I don't know the answer to that, but I do think you have to be aware of that.
I've seen the same thing in my own clinic, and I struggle with that as well. I think contralateral eye studies are really powerful because it's the same patient, as long as they've got the same preoperative best corrected visual. But I've had patients complaining about the quality of issues.
Well,
one thing. Yeah.
In our case, it's usually just because we don't get good scans on one eye.
Oh,
so
yes.
That's why we use it just
Yes.
on one eye.
Gotcha.
So the question is if that happens, should we just punt and go to wavefront optimized, or should we do the one eye? So lately, as I look, if it's the dominant eye, I do it as the Contoura.
Very good. Well, I want to share with you guys one more set of data. This is 1 month postoperative results from my clinic, single center, single surgeon, and comparing different ways that I had used in the past of treating Contoura. So I had 300 eyes that I had planned Contoura treatments using the manifest refraction. I had 204 eyes that I had planned treatments using TMR, and I had 281 eyes that had been planned using Phorcides. And the Phorcides data is in gray. The manifest and the TMR data are in the orange and yellow. And you can see that the Phorcides planned treatments were better than the TMR or the manifest refraction treatments. What's especially powerful here, though, is as you compare the gray bar, the Phorcides planned Contoura, to the blue bar is the FDA data. And at 2020, Phorcides planned Contoura was producing better results, 93% of patients at 2020 or better, than the FDA study. And at the 2015 level, right on par with FDA. You say, well, so what? It's as good as the FDA. Go back and think about the FDA study. The FDA study was very tightly restricted. It only used eyes where the manifest and measured were within 5 to 10 degrees difference. And the average magnitude, the most they could differ in magnitude, the maximum was 0.75. Our study looked at all eyes. Every eye that was allowed to be treated with Contoura, we took in. So the average difference, not the maximum, was 0.72 diopters. And we had eyes where they differed in degrees by 70 degrees, 100 degrees, 122 degree differences. So to produce results that were better than the FDA 2020 and as good at 2015 by taking on all comers, this means this technology is ready to treat all patients. We're going to be presenting this data. This is working through publication right now, but we did a retrospective study looking at 5 US LASIK refractive centers, and we retrospectively looked back at how treatments were being calculated, whether they were being calculated versus manifest refraction, versus TMR, or versus Phorcides. And the results was that Phorcides was proven to be the best. That in this retrospective study, and it's one study, the poorest calculated outcomes were obtained with manifest refraction. The best outcomes were treated with the Phorcides software. Spherical equivalency. Here you can see spherical equivalency of Phorcides planned eyes on the left and spherical equivalency of wavefront optimized eyes treated on the right. The standard deviation is lower in the Phorcides planned Contoura eyes. You'll notice, though, in the Phorcides diagram on the left, towards the higher levels of myopia, there's a little tendency towards overcorrection. We saw this. We've adapted this and brought down the amount of treatment there. So we've modified that algorithm a little bit. And so this is going to be more accurate by the time it reaches your hands. Cylinder results were better with cylinder planned Phorcides Contoura treatments than wavefront optimized. Standard deviation of 0.19 versus in the wavefront optimized standard deviation of 0.29. And again, I'm not here to badmouth wavefront optimized treatments. They're fantastic. They're really good. This is even a little bit better. Looking finally at spherical equivalency outcomes, Phorcides versus wavefront optimized. One of the impressive things is for astigmatic myopic patients, 100% of the patients were within a half diopter of expected. Whereas using wavefront optimized astigmatic myopic patients, that was about 90.9% in my center. So conclusions, results are early, but that's encouraging because in the FDA trial, results at 1 month were overshadowed by the results with Contoura at 3 months, and they got even better at 12 months. So as good as these results are at 1 month, we think that we're going to see them improve over time. We're taking our data, we're constantly improving our algorithms, and in its current state, the early results seem to show that Phorcides results are better than wavefront optimized, better than manifest planned Contoura or TMR planned Contoura results. We are going to have a full website that supports users. It will have a forum where you can discuss cases, bring up questions. It will have all sorts of information and training opportunities there.